Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Get to Know CCC webinar. This webinar is essentially covering an introductory session about CCC, who we are as an organization, resources, as well as opportunities available to our network of advocates and community partners that are new to CCC. So thank you all for joining us this morning so we can introduce you to our organization. Just to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started, we are recording this webinar to use for future purposes. So I do ask if anyone has questions, especially as you get to know a little bit about our organization, that you take note of them or include them in the chat. And we'll be sure to get to a Q&A portion at the end of, after the end of the presentation portion. So while I'll have the rest of the CCC team introduce themselves as we get to their own portions, but I do ask for anyone joining us today that if you can share your name and pronouns, organization and role, and if you can enact any policy at the city state level, what would it be? And you could put that information in the chat just as I share a little bit about this webinar and who we are in an overview. So CCC is an organization committed to engaging and mobilize New Yorkers to make the city a better place for children. Over the last 75 years, we've been developing and refining an approach to child advocacy that is fact-based. And our mission is to ensure that every New York child is healthy, housed, educated, and safe. Now, today, we're going to be sharing a little bit more about our mission and the work that we do to advance that mission. We'll hear first from the policy and advocacy team, a little bit about their role, as well as a high-level discussion of what our advocacy priorities are. We'll then share a little bit about our research and data work at CCC, and then transition to our civic engagement initiatives that include programmings, events, and other resources that you might be interested in. And again, we'll be transitioning to a Q&A after this to answer any questions that folks may have about our work or opportunities they see to partner with our organization. With that being said, I'll transition to Alice and Daryl, who will introduce themselves as well as our work in the policy and advocacy setting. Take it away, Alice and Daryl.
Thank you, Carlos. My name is Alice Buffkin. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Director of Policy for Child and Adolescent Health at Citizens Committee for Children. And along with my colleague, Daryl Hornick-Becker, who's going to speak in a moment, we're going to be speaking to you about some of the advocacy and policy priorities that CCC is working on. So before we dive into some of the specific priorities, I wanted to provide a little bit of background on how CCC conducts its advocacy. We advocate on policy priorities at both the New York City and the New York State level. We also do some federal advocacy on issues that impact New York children and families. For instance, we are closely following the debates around the federal spending bill that are being had right now and are joining our national partners in advocating for comprehensive federal legislation that includes critical investments like a permanent child tax credit. We conduct our advocacy in collaboration with partners on the ground, from providers to advocates to educators to parents to youth, often through coalitions and campaigns, because we think there's the greatest strength in bringing together people around a common cause. In terms of the types of advocacy we do, we advocate and try to build champions among city and state elected leaders, as well as leaders within city and state agencies. We meet with these leaders on key issues with our partners. We try to elevate the voices of impacted families through media and through meetings, rallies, other events. We write briefs, fact sheets, one-pagers on key issues, and we testify and provide comments at relevant hearings. Ultimately, we aim to mobilize support and put pressure on leaders to make positive change for the children and families in New York. So now I'm going to move into talking through some of our priorities in the areas of healthy, housed, educated, and safe, and we'll turn it over to Daryl after that. So first, in the area of ensuring that every child is healthy, I know, I do not need to tell this group and those on this call that this has been a year and a half like no other. We have seen children experiencing the loss of loved ones, of illness, of education disruption, of financial insecurity. All of this has had an enormous emotional toll on children and their families. We have seen rising mental health needs at the same time that we saw a decline in access because of the pandemic. And all of this has really resulted in a rise in children presenting at hospitals with higher level of need. So we believe it's really imperative that we support the behavioral health of children, which was an issue even before COVID, but has become even more of a challenge for the families in our state. So at the state level, we work through a coalition known as Healthy Minds, Healthy Kids on an array of issues, ultimately with the goal of ensuring that all children have the behavioral health supports that they need. And at the city level, we work with a campaign that focuses on positive school environments and providing behavioral health support in schools. So without going into too much detail, we support a full continuum of behavioral health supports. Some focus areas include ensuring overall there's more funding for children's behavioral health. We know that historically children have received only a fraction of funding for behavioral health. And so we want to see, especially with this new federal funding coming in, greater investment in the mental and emotional well-being of children. We want to strengthen the workforce. We know that we have a chronic shortage of providers able to meet the behavioral health needs of children. We want to focus on prevention and two-generation models that really bring in innovative supports for young children and their families and caregivers. And we want to focus on schools and reducing policing and punitive practices, and instead providing whole school supports and a continuum that can serve children with all needs. In the areas of children with developmental delays and disabilities, we work with the Kids Can't Wait campaign that focuses on improving access to early intervention and preschool special education. Like with many areas, early intervention, we know that many children are struggling to access those services because of provider shortages. And we know for a child under the age of 3 with a developmental delay or disability, a month can be a lifetime. So we focus on areas like increasing provider capacity, on tackling issues of racial inequities and access to care, in trying to promote community efforts to engage families in early intervention supports, and in looking at issues around telehealth equity. In the area of childhood lead poisoning, we work with a city-level lead poisoning prevention coalition. The city has done enormous work over the past decade or so in reducing the number of children who are experiencing lead poisoning, but we still have far too many children who have been poisoned by lead. Largely, that comes from peeling paint in buildings. And so, a big focus of this coalition at the city level is, one, having more proactive efforts on the part of the city to actually find areas where children may be at risk before they become lead poisoned. And the other component of that is really enforcement and accountability. We know that the main reason we don't see lead identified or addressed to protect children is because landlords fail to enforce the laws that are actually on the books. So a lot of work around enforcement and accountability. And then the last piece I'll say in the healthy area is around combating food insecurity. Again, another area we know issues have gotten even worse as a result of the pandemic. But working not just for emergency food relief, but overall enhancing funding for programs that connect children and families to nutritional supports and strengthen anti-hunger efforts in schools. And then I'll move now into talking about some areas in the housing area. So we work closely with the Family Homelessness Coalition to focus on areas of housing and homelessness. Of course, with COVID-19, this has had a huge toll on housing, on fears of eviction with the increase in job loss, of housing instability. We also know that overcrowded housing has contributed to poor outcomes resulting from the pandemic. The eviction moratorium has been essential, but it is only temporary. And we know that families will owe a really impossible amount after this moratorium is lifted. So we therefore need both short and long-term rental assistance for families in our city and in our state. And another important way to combat homelessness is to get people out of shelters and into stable homes. But unfortunately, we know that the voucher amounts are far too low. So we need to expand housing vouchers and increase their value so that more families can actually get into the housing that they need and receive the support that they need. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Daryl, who'll speak on education.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. So my name is Daryl Hornick-Becker. I'm a policy and advocacy associate here at CCC. And I work in the education space. So for us, we define that as childcare, K through 12 issues, as well as after school and youth services, everything that kind of happens outside the classroom. So I'll touch on our education policy area, and then I'll also go into our every child safe and child welfare areas. So in education, first and foremost, we're engaged in childcare advocacy at the city, state, and federal level sometimes. At the city level, often in partnership with the Campaign for Children, at the state level with the Empire State Campaign for Childcare. And at the city level, a lot of our childcare advocacy is focused on the opportunity we're going to have with a new mayor and new administration coming in. While the current de Blasio administration has made childcare certainly a priority during their time in office, there's still real gaps in the system that remain and that we're trying to call attention to, kind of sound the alarm and have the next mayor address. So two of those biggest gaps we're talking about are infant toddler care and full day care. Obviously, this mayor has invested in universal pre-K for 4-year-olds. That's universal. And then most recently took universal pre-K, aged it down to 3-year-olds, and has announced that that will be expanded to universal. And while that's helpful to certainly a lot of families, it really leaves out the children younger than 3, that's infants and toddlers. There's still a real lack of care for infants and toddlers. Infant and toddler care is also still the most expensive, the least affordable, takes up the largest amount of a family's income. And all of the universal expansions of pre-K for 4-year-olds and for 3-year-olds, almost all of the expansion and a lot of what is currently in the system ends at the school day. It ends at 3 p.m. And that's just not an option for so many working families. And so especially when we're talking about economic recovery, when we're talking about getting people back to work, that's what we're really focused on, is infant toddler care and a full day of care, and expanding those and investing in those opportunities. To that end, the Campaign for Children and CCC has been engaged in, we've published infographics on the demonstrated need for both infant toddler care and full day care and the lack of capacity that's currently offered in the system. We've sent multiple letters about contracting efforts in order to expand those. And as well as we've organized over this year and continuing it through January to influence and shape the campaign for mayor. And so we've done events, we did a town hall, we did interviews with every candidate in the Democratic primary, and then published what their stances were on childcare, and that also included after-school youth services. And we're also really focused at the state level on childcare as well. Obviously, we have a new governor, and historically, this governor is friendlier towards childcare, and so we're looking at this positively as an opportunity that there might be some real state investment in childcare. We saw some last year, but we could see a whole nother level of it this year. The same is true with the federal level, right? The reconciliation bill that is currently being debated in Congress, and President Biden's Build Back Better proposed budget plan does contain real investments in childcare, though as it kind of gets negotiated and passed, we'll see how much remains. But something we're really focused on at all levels, that's federal and state, especially as they try to invest in childcare, but also as in the city, is the workforce. Kind of like Alice mentioned, the workforce in a lot of the services sector, nonprofit sector, and human services sector is really struggling. And the same is true of childcare. It's historically true, and if anything, the problems have been exacerbated. And so we really want to focus on, with any investment in childcare, whether it's at the federal level or state level, there has to be a concurrent investment in the childcare workforce and in providers themselves. The same is true at the city level. There have been historic expansions of salary parity between UPK provided in community-based centers and those in schools, but there's still a lot of groups left out of that agreement. And so really at all levels, we're focusing on not just investing in childcare and expanding access and adding seats, but also in supporting the workforce. On the K through 12 side, this most recent year, in response to the pandemic, we saw historic investments at the federal level in education broadly. And also we saw finally at the state level, paying the amount of what was owed in the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, or a long-standing amount that was ordered by a court case to be paid to New York State schools and their children and families. We saw those amounts finally come in, and then we saw with this federal investment that the city proposed a plan, an academic recovery plan of how to use those funds. But a lot of our advocacy is going to be talking about, well, what was left out of that plan? So areas that we are historically engaged in and really engaged in now are students with a lot of obstacles to success and really vulnerable groups. Like that includes students experiencing homelessness and multilingual learners, students who have a lot of potential, but historically have some of the worst outcomes and aren't achieving that potential. And so that includes adding community coordinators in shelters to help improve attendance rates and outcomes, as well as making sure the city is coordinating interagency communication to make sure that students in temporary housing who are dealing with housing departments, as well as the Department of Education, as well as social services, are getting what they need and they're not lost in the kind of bureaucratic shuffle. And then in terms of the recovery effort, making sure that there are targeted investments and supports for multilingual learners, both inside the classroom and outside of it, which are things that are currently really missing from the city's academic recovery plan. On the youth services side, we saw another big investment this summer with the Summer Rising program, which was the city kind of expanding summer camp to include summer school, include social emotional learning, and making it universal and open, which was great, but there were still a lot of issues with it. But the biggest issue with it is that it was just 1 year funded. And CCC has historically been advocating to baseline summer camp funding because it's not something that is baselined in the budget. We have to fight for it every year. Well, we got this expansion this year in Summer Rising. We still don't have anything next year. And obviously that is going to be a budget for the next mayor. So we're advocating for that to finally baseline summer camp funding. And then also on the youth services side, we have after school in New York City, but there is still a big need in the after school space for the youngest children for elementary school settings. And so advocating a lot for an expansion in after school to make it universal, but starting at the elementary level, most importantly. On the Every Child Safe section or child welfare, historically, we advocate for preventive services, which are interventions early on or in the home that prevent the removal of children from the home and their caregivers. These are really crucial interventions, and they're services that have so much benefit down the line. And unfortunately, economic insecurity or periods of economic hardship or job loss, like the kind we've just seen over the past year and a half, make preventive services all the more important, because 2/3 of suspected child maltreatment reports are cases of neglect due to economic insecurity. So economic security without addressing it, without doing preventive services, really can lead to children being separated from the home. And so while we are advocating at the state level for investment in preventive services, we're also coming up on a very interesting deadline, which is that the statute that mandates how much the state funds preventive services is set to expire. And the state has cut back on that investment over the past years, and they match what the city provides for preventive services less. And so a big part of our advocacy in child welfare this year at the state level is going to be getting that portion that the state matches back up to what it was, making sure that the city is not on the hook and thus cutting other things. So a real push on preventive services this year. And lastly, on the Every Child Safe section, the part of the federal stimulus funds, which you may be familiar with, expanded the child tax credit and made it so that more families would be eligible. The amount they would get for a tax credit for having children was more, and it happened more frequently and direct upfront cash payments as opposed to a tax reimbursement. Those have real serious benefits for families and for keeping families out of poverty, especially and families with children. But it is a 1 year proposal that was included in that stimulus, and it is not permanent. And so it is included in the Build Back Better budget proposal, which I mentioned we're advocating in other areas, but making a big push at the federal level to make sure that the expanded child tax credit is made permanent in the budget, in the federal budget. And I believe we do have a Take Action page, which is linked in the slide and which we'll send out, where you can advocate to your federal representative to make sure that that is included in the budget. And with that, I think I will pass it to Jack to talk about our data side.
Thank you, Daryl. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Jack Mullen. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm a research associate as part of the research and data team at Citizens Committee for Children. And our team is really about keeping track of New York City's children. This phrase you may catch on the top right of my shoulder. And we do that in different ways through participatory and community-based research and engagement with caregivers, youth, and New Yorkers across the city. We do this through careful and meticulous data collection and analysis. And we do this through research to support policy campaigns, inform program design, and to highlight, more broadly, to highlight inequities that require structural investments and reform to create a future in which, as our mission says, to create a future in which every child is healthy, housed, educated, and safe. So with that introduction on who I am, just a quick picture of what the rest of the team looks like as well. So here is our team of research and data team members, which was typically a team of 4. We're currently 3 and hoping to welcome a new staff member very soon. Our team which is circled in yellow there. We bring backgrounds in geospatial analysis, in labor and housing market research, and in international children's rights. Our team is led by Bijan Kimiagar, circled on the left, who joined in 2017 and has been Associate Executive Director for Research over the last 3 years, as well as Maria Drobniak on the right, who is Senior Research Associate for Data Resources, and who also joined in 2017 and who really oversees the design and production of our data products, which I'll go over in the next few slides. So in terms of what we do, I'm going to be sharing a few highlights of publications and products that we've put out over the last year or so, starting with our long-standing publications. So since 2010, we've produced an annual index of child and family well-being in New York City, which exists on our database, and I'll get to that database in a few slides. And this has been published as a report over the last 5 years. And the purpose of this index is really to identify community districts or areas and neighborhoods across the city where children and families face barriers to their well-being. Really to understand, as one of my favorite writers, Kiese Lehman puts it, to understand how children have access to healthy choices and second chances. In practice, this means collecting data to measure a holistic set of variables that influence the status and trajectory of children's development, from families' incomes and housing conditions to infant health, teen pregnancy, to educational progress and community safety. So we performed this analysis for all 59 community districts in New York City, and we recently published the first edition of this index also for the 62 counties across New York State as well. And each of these publications is really designed to spur action by public and private actors and funders to improve conditions for children and families in specific communities and city and statewide as well. On the right side of this slide is the latest edition of CCC's data book, Keeping Track of New York City's Children. Since 1993, the organization has published this book every other year as a type of almanac of information, collecting facts on the state of New York City's children. So this book monitors both worrisome and welcome trends in child well-being, and was really the precursor to CCC's online database, data.cccnewyork.org. Right now, our team is actually working on the 2022 edition of the data book, which will be designed to inform incoming elected officials in the midst of this turnover in City Hall, Borough Halls, and in the City Council in the coming year. So our team also carries out community-based assessments in particular communities around the city. You can see this ranges from Upper Manhattan to Central Brooklyn to the North Shore of Staten Island, and most recently in Elmhurst and Corona and Queens. And for each of these efforts, we really use a broader repertoire of data collection methods. Beyond collecting statistics from surveys and the like, we also conduct interviews with local service providers and carry out focus groups with young people and caregivers who live and work in the community to inform the research and draw a qualitative picture of both the challenges and really the strengths for families in the area. So we also highlight certain assets and community resources that exist there that might be able to address or require further investment to address the family's needs. We work on a number of data briefs and reports for issue-specific campaigns, and some of these include recent data briefs that support and speak to advocacy priorities that both Alice and Daryl were speaking on, related to family homelessness, related to food and income security, and related to childcare investments. And another report I'm highlighting here on the right is one that we issued jointly with our partners at Advocates for Children, focused on the city's system of early interventions for children that Alice was speaking on in terms of children with developmental or behavioral health challenges. And this report tracks data on different stages of the early intervention process and really emphasized racial inequities that we observed across the young children who needed these services. So you can find more of these digital briefs and insights at the link below on this slide. And finally, as I alluded to earlier, much of the data that compose these reports, these briefs, these issue-specific publications can be found on our online and interactive and evergreen database, data.cccnewyork.org. Here's where we compile data from city administrative and state administrative agencies, Census Bureau surveys, and other sources to really provide data visuals, maps, tables, bar charts, on different indicators of well-being. And you can see from different areas, from demographics to economic conditions to housing, health, early care and education, youth and juvenile justice, and child welfare and community safety. You can also search for different indicators using the search button there and find over hundreds of indicators that relate to different aspects of child and family well-being. The pandemic has also really increased the need for CCC to serve as a technical partner to serve family-focused service providers and philanthropic organizations. And we're always looking to hear from people in these spaces about other ways that we can continue to enhance this database. When you come to this site, actually, you'll find a pop-up survey on the bottom right that poses a few questions on a survey module that we've adapted over the years to better understand the interests and needs of our audience. So the latest version of this actually invites users of the site to contribute any ideas towards the development of next year's Keeping Track data book. And so I encourage you all who are using the site already or maybe coming to the first time to contribute your ideas there. So that's a quick recap of CCC's research and data products. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Laura Jangstrom. Oh, sorry, and one last slide. So looking ahead to 2021 and 2022, just in terms of what we have lined up for the coming months, we have a new edition of the Keeping Track data book, as I said, to be released in 2022. This will be the 14th edition, as I said, positioned really as a tool for strategic engagement with city officials as they come into City Hall, Borough Hall, and the City Council. We will also be releasing in the next few months a new analysis of what we call school-ready communities, examining different factors at the community district level that shape young children's readiness to enter kindergarten from ages 0 to 5. We'll continue to be informing survey and research design with community partners. So as I was saying, informing different strategies to engage families and young people through participatory research for certain campaigns related to family homelessness, as well as with the Northern Manhattan Early Childhood Collaborative. And more broadly, we're going to be continuing to produce analytic projects, these data briefs that will be unpacking, for example, the evolving childcare landscape over the last year, as well as monitoring broader indicators of well-being using a new survey from the Census Bureau called the Household Pulse Survey. So with that, I'd like to pass it to Laura.
Hello, everybody. My name is Laura Jangstrom. I'm the Director of Civic Engagement Programs at Citizens Committee for Children. And today I will be talking a little bit about our programs, events, and resources that we offer to the public. I'll begin with the community leadership course. I see some current and former graduates of the class, so welcome. I'm glad to see you all here. The community leadership course is really our flagship civic engagement program. We've been running it every fall since 1966, and it's a 10-week course for adults that really walks them through all of the issue areas that CCC does advocacy around. So each week focuses on a different topic. There's readings, there's discussions with outside experts, and our wonderful staff also does seminars to give folks a lay of the land around each of the issue areas we focus on. We also have youth programs, so I'll talk about Youth Action NYC next. It's an after-school program for high schoolers. And again, it's a 10-week program. We do run this program once in the fall and once in the spring. And we bring young people from all 5 boroughs together, and all of our civic engagement programs are done online now, but when we're in person, it's wonderful too. But we bring young people from all 5 boroughs together to talk about the issues that they're seeing in their schools and their communities, to teach them the steps of effective advocacy, and to really empower them to advocate on behalf of themselves, their peers, their schools, and their communities. Once they graduate from the YCLC, we have additional opportunities for them to stay involved as Youth Action members, where they really design and implement advocacy campaigns and projects that they want to steer, that they feel passionate about. We also have a peer trainers program. So, mostly it's our juniors and seniors, the leaders of the program. They design and facilitate workshops for other youth programs across the city around the idea of advocacy, city government, budgets, really just understanding how young people can have a voice in the public discourse that impacts their lives. Something really exciting that we have going on is called Voicing Our Future. In anticipation of the citywide elections, our young people wanted to take the pulse of how other youth were feeling in the city about policy issues, and what they wanted the candidates running for elected office to be focusing on. So they surveyed over 1,300 young people via text message and Google Forms. They conducted focus groups with an additional 250, and really unpacked a lot of what young people are thinking about, what they're concerned about, and what they want their elected representatives to be centering when it comes to youth issues. So we're still mobilizing around that. We have an event coming up on October 20th, which is a forum with candidates running for borough president from all 5 boroughs. And so I will drop a link into the chat, both about the project and then also how to RSVP for the event. There you go. The next slide, you can see just like a snapshot of the Google Data Studio, which was how they housed all of their data. It was very interesting for them to use this sort of interactive online tool as opposed to putting it in a PDF or, you know, in a report. I think it really speaks to young people, you know, sort of wanting to live more in the now and have the data at their fingertips in a way that they could manipulate and really use. And so the data studio you can also access through the link that I just dropped in the chat. And I really do encourage you to click through all of the slides because the data that they came up with is really fascinating. And I think, you know, the last thing I'll talk about, before I talk about major publications, I also want to say, you know, these are things that we sort of offer to people who have the time to, you know, invest a semester in sort of really immersing themselves in these issues. But we also offer workshops and sort of one-offs or a series of workshops for organizations or youth programs. So you could just get in touch with us if you want us to sort of bring some of what we do more intensively internally out to your organization. We'd be happy to tailor something to whatever it is your needs are. And then last, I want to just focus a little bit on the major publications. So we publish, you know, really in collaboration with all of the teams at CCC, reports and briefs that call attention to the most pressing issues impacting children and families. So everything that we're kind of working on in the now, we put on our website, we put up on Facebook and social media because we want the public to be informed about everything that we're learning through our work. And we hope that people will use those resources to really boost their own advocacy within their communities. And I think I'm going to hand it over to Carlos now.
Thank you, Laura. So before we get to the Q&A, I just wanted to take a little bit of time to share 2 more resources that we have at CCC. One of them is our COVID-19 resources page, which since the start of the pandemic, we've been doing this work to research and analyze data as well as policies. So that way we ensure that the New York City response to recovery for this public health crisis supports children and families all across our city. And so in addition to a number of recent publications linked on the right side here of this slide here, you'll see that there are a number of topics that we addressed in both blog posts or insights, as well as data and analytic resources that might be important to your work on different issue areas that relate to the pandemic. In the chat, Laura will be including a link to this page, but there is also a section where we include high-level resources that are catered towards families and their needs. So this is also an opportunity that if you're an organization that has a resource or provides some type of service that you would like us to include on this page, you can reach out to us and I'll be sure to include our contact information at the end. And we'll be able to include your resources on that same page. And then lastly, I wanted to take a little bit of time to highlight some of the events that have already been spoke about, as well as new ones that are upcoming in the next month or two. As Laura said, October 20th is our Voicing Our Future event, which is a virtual youth-led forum with New York City candidates for borough president. And this is a continuation of the work that Laura described by our Youth Action NYC members and their Voicing Our Future campaign. On October 26th, CCC has its only fundraiser of the year, which is our 2021 celebration breakfast. We'll be honoring a few folks who have been instrumental to both CCC work, but also to the work at large in shaping the discourse and advocating for the needs of families and children, as well as the needs of just New Yorkers in general. And so you'll see a list of guest speakers that will be attending that event. You'll be able to see that event via a link on our site. And if you want to get tickets or know someone who's interested in getting tickets and donating to our organization, you'll be able to see that information on the main page. And then lastly, on November 9th, we'll be having our next webinar on child and family well-being focused on the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is essentially updated findings from the Household Pulse Survey for this year. That is a continuation of a presentation we did almost at the same time. I believe it was like November last year where we did the same presentation. So this presentation will essentially cover new data from the Household Pulse Survey that covers additional date ranges beyond what we presented on. All these events you'll be able to see on our events calendar, which is linked here, cccnewyork.org/get-involved. And we also ask if you want to continue to receive updates and information about new events and other opportunities and resources as they come out throughout the year. I highly encourage everyone here to subscribe to our newsletter if you aren't already subscribed. And the link is the same with the / being sign up. So now I want to say thank you to all of our presenters, to Laura, Jack, Alice, and Daryl. And I want to take the time to open it up to some questions and hopefully some answers that we can provide to you. If you want to prefer to speak over phone or over voice, just raise your hand and I'll make sure to unmute folks so that way you can speak to us and ask your questions. And if you do speak that way, just reintroduce yourselves as well as who you are and what organization you're from. So I think we have a few questions as I wait for people to submit their questions or raise their hands. But one question that we received in the chat is, what does the CCC expect from a possible Eric Adams mayoral administration in regards to child welfare and/or policies? I think that can go to either Alice or Daryl.
That's a really great question. And I'll be honest, I don't have an immediate answer only because while I work in the education space, our colleague, Raisa Rodriguez, who's not here, is more in tune to the child welfare space, as well as hopefully someone we'll be bringing on. What I can say is that the Adams administration has indicated some promising things in terms of childcare, in terms of investments kind of across the board at the city level. But again, a lot depends on the state. And so it depends on how much the state is willing to contribute to child welfare, to preventive services matching in terms of what the city ends up investing in. We have not seen a lot of investments at the state level in terms of preventive services because they are often so hamstrung by the state's budget. So I think what the Adams administration prepares to do depends a lot on what the state ends up doing this next budget cycle at the state level. Alice, do you have anything to add there?
I don't have anything to add. I would agree that I think our colleague Raisa could potentially follow up with more details on that. I'll say just more broadly across our areas, I think we are hopeful that with a new city and new state administration, that this is an opportunity to advocate on areas that have sort of been seen as same old. Well, every year we have the same fight. Every year the state doesn't budge or the city doesn't budge. That's just how it is. And I think we're really hopeful that we can disrupt that sort of status quo across our issue areas of course, a lot of advocacy will be figuring out, how can we advocate at with both of these leaders to try to, have policies that are supportive of children and families. And so there's big question marks. But I think we and a lot of our partners throughout the city and the state are viewing this as the time to come in and say things don't have to, be the way they are. We can actually make significant investments. We can actually change the way we operate and be more supportive of families throughout New York.
Oh, great, thank you. So I see another question from Gladys, who asked what languages the resources are available in. And Gladys, correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about our COVID-19 resource page. So the page itself is in English, but there are several resources in there that are in multiple languages whenever that resource is available in that language. But again, I think if anyone has any resources, especially multilingual resources for speakers other than English, then I would suggest you can reach out to both myself and Laura, and we'll be able to provide that resource in that language on that page as well. And then I think something else that was raised by Monique is if we can do a presentation on this or share this information. And I just want to speak to, I think, I'm not sure if this was raised already in our presentation, but we also in the civic engagement team can take on requests to do presentations, and we do a number of presentations from, something as simple as this, where it can be about who we are at CCC and what resources are available at our organization. But we also do a number of trainings and workshops like Advocacy 101, how the budget process works at the city and or state level, and other types of workshops that help kind of provide knowledge and build a kind of learning foundation for how advocacy works, especially legislative advocacy works at the city and sometimes state level. And so any of those types of requests where folks are interested in having a presentation from us or talking about what we can do to provide to either your organization or the community that you work with, you can reach out to us and we can schedule a conversation to talk about that. So I don't see any other questions. If you do have a question, please raise your hand or put the question in the chat box, but I'll give it a minute for folks to submit those. And if no one has any other additional questions you'd like to ask, I'll be placing my contact information in the chat in a minute. You'll be able to follow up with us with any additional questions you have related to our 3 areas of work. And we'll be sure to send this presentation with all the links included in a follow-up to this presentation. So thank you again for everyone who's been able to attend. We look forward to hopefully engaging you in the future, especially if you're new to CCC. Welcome, and we hope this is the start of a long-lasting partnership. So thank you, everyone.